This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. MLK birthday tomorrow, and the MLK Day, the day of observance, is a week from today, right?
Yeah, Monday.
21st.
Which I can't stand that the kids don't have school. They should be in school that day learning about Martin Luther King Jr. I've always maintained that. It's just dumb for them to be out.
Well, I mean, you can learn about Martin Luther King and others on the rest of the days in the school year, too. But that's,
Well, to have,
you know.
don't get me started.
Okay.
I lived in Arizona when they didn't observe the day, and it did not end well.
I understand that. A little, perhaps, taking stock, then, of what the civil rights era has begotten, now some 60 years removed. Also, the continued importance, of course, of Martin Luther King's work and legacy. But we had this conversation with Shelby Steele several weeks back before Christmas. And he helped me crystallize something I wasn't thinking about right in terms of what we talk about a lot, which is messaging to constituencies that otherwise don't affiliate with, say, free market policies in terms of how they vote, even though these would be beneficial. He said, you have to understand, this is Steele, essentially, I'm sort of synthesizing what he said. He said, we're sort of beyond the civil rights era in terms of certainly de jure segregation. We still have problems with de facto segregation. That's certainly the case in Chicago. And so when the appeal is about sort of social justice, like the left does, too many on the center right try to offer the same appeal. I'm not racist either. Rather than offering what so many black families concentrated in urban centers have not had, which is pathways to economic opportunity. It's one of the reasons school choice programs have become so popular and are shifting the balance of political power in states like Florida. Remember, we remarked upon Ron DeSantis nearly winning the Florida governor's race. 44% of the Latino vote, 14% of the black vote. His percentage of the black vote was up, I think, 4 percentage points over Rick Scott from 4 years earlier. And those who know on the ground in Florida suggest that, yeah, the more than 500,000 scholarship families, opportunity scholarship families, able to send their children to better schools because of those scholarships, disproportionately lower income, disproportionately minority, have created a constituency for the Republican Party in Florida, and to some extent Latinos have done the same for Republicans in Arizona, and so it should inform the thinking about how to approach people who have written you off for the last 50 years, which would be my way of saying how the Republicans should approach black families, at least in part. But for more of this, I wanted to bring in much more of an expert on the topic than I. He is our friend Walter Williams, His Eminence, the great professor of economics from George Mason University, syndicated columnist, and his most recent piece is where I want to start, The Worst Enemy of Black People. Professor Williams, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So who is the worst enemy of black people today?
Well, I guess you could compartmentalize it and say, well, black people themselves, and then the white liberals who have advocated various programs, handout programs by government that has, the welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery could not have done, what Jim Crow and all the racism could not have done. And that is destroy the black family. That is, it turns out that nationally, 75% of black kids are born to unwed mothers. And in some cities, such as your own and others, you're talking about 80 or 85%. And in 1938, for example, the illegitimacy rate among blacks was 11% compared to 75% of today. And illegitimacy among whites was 3% compared to roughly 30% today. And so a major problem with black Americans is the liberal agenda that supports this kind of lifestyle. And it turns out that that the worst problems that blacks suffer are self-imposed. That is, it's not the Ku Klux Klan or the White Citizens Council that's going around and getting 16, 17, 18-year-old girls pregnant. It's not the White Citizens Committee or the Ku Klux Klan riding through Chicago and shooting up, I think last year, close to 500 people. And matter of fact, some of the most horrible conditions that Black Americans suffer under are in the very cities that have been under Democrat control for over a half century.
Right. Well, what do you think of community leaders such as Reverend Jesse Jackson? Do you think he's helped his community, or is he keeping the black man down? What do you think?
Well, I think that his ideas and what he's been promoting, the liberal agenda, has been very harmful to black kids, black people in general. Just the whole notion. People are talking about the education, and I've often said that if I were the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, and I wanted to sabotage any kind of chance for academic excellence among black kids, I couldn't think of a better method than the public school system in most cities, where blacks sometimes, many times, have a high school diploma in hand, and they cannot read and write and compute at the sixth grade level, and that's a fraud. And that kind of fraud rests solely on the educational establishment. That is, the educational establishment will say, well, look, there's parental problems, there's crime in the streets, and et cetera, that handicaps black kids' learning. But they have the sole power to issue a diploma. That is, and when they issue a diploma that attests that a kid can read and write at a 12th grade level, when in fact he cannot read at the 5th and 5th and 6th and 7th grade level, that is just academic fraud. And black people haven't tolerated that.
In your piece that I referenced at the outset of this segment, you invoke the words of Malcolm X, who's an iconic black figure to many on the left, particularly the Spike Lees of the world. Made a movie about him, and it seems perhaps that you're suggesting that so many who invoke Malcolm X are misunderstanding the position or the legacy of Malcolm X. It wasn't to be a black separatist. It was to be a problem solver. That seems to be, at least in part, what you're indicating. Is that fair?
That is absolutely right. That is what Malcolm X was. Part of his message was that white liberals cannot solve black people's problem, and I just gave you a couple examples of the rotten education that black kids are receiving and the illegitimacy rate. That is, white liberals cannot solve that problem. And matter of fact, if anything, white liberals have given rise to the problem. That is, they've given the welfare state. They promoted the welfare state that encourages young girls to have babies out of their marriage. They tolerate white liberals tolerate the gross violence in schools. That is, where 5% of the nation's 3.8 million teachers were assaulted in 2016, and many blacks, including ex-President Obama, they want to stop schools from being able to suspend kids that are violent and unruly. That is, they call it. They want to break the I guess high school to prison chain, they say. But the kind of things that are being tolerated by today's black people just would not have been tolerated years ago. I'm almost 83, and the kind of things that are tolerated in schools would have never been tolerated when I was a youngster in schools.
Such as talking back to teachers. I mean, I was a substitute teacher,
assaulting them
and assaulting them too. I mean, it's bad. It feels like a war zone in there.
That's right, and several teachers in Chicago. I did a column some time ago, where there are many Chicago teachers suffering from post-traumatic syndrome.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get your take because you're a renowned economics professor as well. Bill de Blasio made an important statement to give you an indication of where we're at in terms of our political landscape in announcing his plan for New York City to provide health insurance to all of its residents, basically single payer at the local level. And he said, brothers and sisters, and that's important too, almost religious, brothers and sisters, there is plenty of money in the city. It's just in the wrong hands. Your reaction?
Well, I think he and other mayors, they've engaged in policies that have run out the most productive city people in their cities, and calling for higher taxes, imposing higher taxes on the most productive people. And the most productive people didn't become productive by being stupid. He runs them out of the city. If you look at, if you look at population declines in cities like Baltimore and Detroit, population has fallen by 2/3 since 1950 in Detroit and Baltimore, and a lot of the reason for that is that you had Coleman Young in Baltimore trying to provide free lunches and imposing heavy taxes and restrictions on people, and they just ran them out of the city. And so what happens is that the city loses its tax base, and so has raised taxes even more, and then they lose more of their tax base.
He is Walter Williams, a professor of economics at George Mason University, syndicated columnist. His website, if you want to get all of his musings on various topics, walterewilliams.com. walterewilliams.com is the website. Professor Williams, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
And thank you for inviting me. Goodbye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If you're not pleased